Today, we're ranking every Pokemon game on the 3DS from worst to best. And coming in last place is one of the most disappointing and disrespectful games the Pokemon Company has ever made, with Pokémon Shuffle. As a fan of Pokemon puzzle games, this was just so sad to see, because not only had they already made the same game 100 times before, but it was also the textbook definition of a gacha game. And though the gameplay isn't bad, it's also not good. On the bottom screen, you shift Pokemon around in order to make matches so you can clear the board. And the only real difference between this and any other Pokemon puzzle game is that you are limited to a certain amount of moves. And for the first 50 or so levels, this isn't really a problem, but then the puzzles start to get exponentially more difficult, and the only way to make it easier is to buy items. You do get some coins by playing the game and completing puzzles, but it's also much easier to just buy them, and a lot of the later puzzles will almost require you to use items. And though you don't have to pay real money for it, and you can do it without it, you also don't have to pay a doctor for surgery, but it helps. Which one of these is a kidney? But coins aren't the only thing you can buy, because similar to the other free-to-play mobile games that were popular at the time, you are given a certain amount of hearts that are used whenever you start a puzzle. And there are only two ways to get more. You either have to wait real-world time or pay money. And there is not a single thing I despise more than putting an artificial cap on playtime in order to squeeze out an extra dollar. So even though the core gameplay is fine, it's just hard to enjoy. And Pokemon Shuffle ended up being a combination of the worst things a game can be. And the only thing I could think that would have made it worse is if they decided to put in ads.
And you can grow 6 inches in a week if you take our new supplement, Rip 'em Off. And act fast and you can have this whole jar of olives.
When the 3DS first released, Nintendo and the Pokemon Company were really hedging their bets on augmented reality being popular. And though the technology is pretty cool, I feel like I've only ever used it under duress. And there is no better example of that than Pokemon Dream Radar, an augmented reality game where you shoot clouds. I really wish this made any sense. I'm not a huge fan of augmented reality games at all because when I play them, I end up looking like a psychopath. The only reason to ever play this was to unlock the Therian version of the Forces of Nature, because for some reason I still can't really explain, they decided to lock those Pokemon behind this atrocious game. And the fact that they had the nerve to charge $3 for this is a crime that I can only describe as gross negligence. Pokemon Art Academy exists, and that's really all it has going for it. It is a simple game based on a simple idea. It is a tool that teaches you how to draw Pokemon, and you do so by drawing them on your 3DS. But I would like to argue you could do the same thing with a pen and paper. Picasso is nothing but a fraud. This will bring you through various lessons on how to draw different Pokemon. So if you're somebody who grew up wanting to be an artist, I could see how you would really like this. But even when playing this on a 3DS XL, the touchscreen just is not big enough for this to be fun. Now there are some cool parts about this, like when you're done drawing a Pokemon, you'll get a little fun fact about the species, but whenever I pick this up to play, I feel more frustration than fun. If I were an artist, I would probably think this is really cool, but I can barely draw a bath without almost throwing a toaster in it. But even though it's not for me, I don't think it's inherently bad. Detective Pikachu is what happens when the Pokemon Company just completely runs out of ideas. And though I went into this with little to no expectation of this being good at all, I can say with certainty that this is absolutely a video game. In the past, Pokemon has told some incredible stories, and considering this is a game where you're solving mysteries, I expected the story to be top-notch. But in fact, the biggest crime here is that this game was sold in the first place. You play as Tim Goodman, who's on a mission to figure out what happened to his missing father, and you work alongside his former Pokemon partner, Detective Pikachu, who now has amnesia, to figure out how to get his memories back so you can ultimately find your dad. The idea is simple, and they had a lot of room for this to be written well, but it's almost like they didn't try and write a good story at all. The game is broken up into 9 chapters that all function the exact same way. Go to a place, talk to a person, they send you to talk to someone else who gives you a little bit of information, and ultimately you help them with a minor inconvenience they could have figured out for themselves. There are plenty of examples of games that take this idea and do it well, with one of the most common comparisons being to Phoenix Wright. But at least Phoenix Wright tells a good story and has good characters. But not only do I not like any of these characters, characters, I just don't care about them at all. And it's not like the gameplay is any better. The entire game keeps you on one set path with a strict order of operations on how to do things, and every chapter holds your hand so much that it completely removes any of the fun that could be had during the game. There's no way for you to explore and figure things out on your own because Detective Pikachu will tell you exactly what to do as soon as a cutscene is done. And somehow, it even gets worse because this game is full of quick time events that mean absolutely nothing. It doesn't matter if you pass them or fail them, sometimes it'll just start you over as soon as it starts so you can try again, or the game will just carry on as if nothing happened. Of course, this is a game that is geared towards children, so I do expect it to be easier than other games that are like it, but even for young children, there is little to no reason to actually play this game. It is disrespectfully easy, painfully written, and full of stupid mechanics that make this one of the most pointless video games ever made.
I think I found a clue. It just says to eat glass.
The Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series is full of incredible games, and also Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Gates to Infinity. Now, I don't hate this as much as a lot of people do because there are things about this that I do genuinely like, but considering how good all of the other Mystery Dungeon games are, this just doesn't compete. And like with any group, there is always going to be a worst. If you need an example of that, go ask your mom who her worst child is and be prepared for her to say, "I still love you." From the very beginning of the game, they made one fatal mistake. They got rid of the quiz to figure out what Pokemon you are. In every other game, you take the quiz and get paired with the Pokemon that fits your personality. But this time, you just pick one of the 5 available starters. Your choices are any of the 3 Unova starters, Pikachu, or Axew. And I don't know whose choice it was to make this terrible selection the only options, but they deserve to be fired out of a cannon into a brick wall. But once you make your selection of what Pokemon you want to be, you quickly plummet directly down to Earth. Like in most games, you're turned into a Pokemon to help save the Pokemon world. You have visions of a Munna being chased by a Hydrogen somewhere in a cave, and you partner up with a Pokemon, buy some land, and start a colony. You and your partner Pokemon work together to build a paradise for Pokemon. And along the way, like most Mystery Dungeon games, you go on a mission to figure out why you were turned into a Pokemon in the first place. I'm gonna keep it spoiler free because the only redeeming part of this game is the story. And even then, it's not bad, but it's not great. The biggest changes here came to the art style and the way the game is played. This was the first Pokemon Mystery Dungeon that was brought into 3D. And though it created some problems, it ultimately looked pretty good. I do prefer the sprite-based artworks of the earlier games in the series, but I can't say the environments and the Pokemon themselves look bad at all. The problem came with the camera and how close your Pokemon is to it at all times. Inside the dungeons, you're navigating through very tight passageways, and because you can barely see what's in front of you, you have zero time to prepare whatsoever. Luckily, this isn't as big of a problem because this is much easier than any other Pokemon Mystery Dungeon game that we've ever gotten. There was only 1 or 2 times in my entire playthrough that I ever thought I could possibly die. The hunger mechanic that was in every other game in the series was removed until the post-game, so if you wanted to heal, you didn't even need items, all you had to do was just walk around for a minute. But the biggest and most notable problems came from the progression and the dialogue. The text speed in this game is painfully slow, and if you combine that with how dialogue heavy this game is, then you are in for a terrible time. And there are absolutely more reasons why this is the worst Pokemon Mystery Dungeon game, but all I'll say is that if I had a choice between playing this again and being locked in a hot car, I think I know what I would pick. Ever since the first game on the Wii, I have been a big fan of Pokemon Rumble. And though it's not bad, Pokemon Rumble World is my least favorite game in the series. Mostly because this is one of the Pokemon games that was free to start.
That's the corporate way to say scam.
To give the Pokemon Company credit, they did end up releasing a physical copy of this game with all of the microtransactions fully removed, and by that I mean they gave you enough of the in-game currency to never need more again. But at its core, this is just what would happen if they made Pokemon Rumble a mobile game. There is a very loose story about you working for the king of the Kingdom of Toys who was trying to one-up a magician who had 10 Pokemon by tasking you to catch 11. And to do that, you take hot air balloons to different islands and fight Pokemon that are in your path. Although they released a version that had all of the microtransactions removed, this still does feel like a mobile game. For example, once you buy a hot air balloon, you would think that you get to go to a full world and pick where you go. But no, that would make sense, and we don't do that here. Instead, you are randomly sent to a world that balloon can take you to. But don't worry, if you want to go to a specific island, all you gotta do is pay money. Something that I absolutely did not do at any point ever. Now, outside of the free to start aspects, what is here works pretty well. There is a solid sense of progression because the more Pokemon you collect, the higher your rank gets, which then allows you to go to different islands and find even more Pokemon. And though this is my least favorite game in the series, it's not terrible. And I do appreciate that they gave people the opportunity to try out Pokemon Rumble for the first time without having to spend $1. From the bottom of my heart, I genuinely wish I didn't like Pokemon Picross, but unfortunately, I genuinely do. Pokemon Picross is a simple Pokemon puzzle game, but thankfully, it's different than just moving two Pokemon around in order to get a match. On each of the columns and rows, there's a collection of numbers that tells you how many spots you have to have filled in and how many you have to have empty. Sometimes there will be a collection of numbers, and other times there will be what the game calls an edge power.
Now, some jokes just write themselves.
But ultimately, the game has you filling in various blocks to make a design that looks like something from the Pokemon world. There are different Pokemon available in the game that you can add to your party that give you bonuses and hints on how to solve the puzzle, but if you want to be an absolutely insane person like me, you could just not use them ever, and give yourself early onset heart failure because you have too big of an ego to ask for help. But as much as I do enjoy this game, I have to recognize that this is a freemium title. There is a currency called Picrites that you earn by playing the game and clearing various objectives, and of course also by purchasing them from the eShop. And this might just be a me problem, but I don't like it when a game is trying to rob me blind. They had such a good core gameplay experience, but they ruined it because they wanted to be the next Candy Crush. And the worst part about it is that now that the eShop is closed and there's no way to make purchases, you just have to deal with the terrible game design of a free-to-play game without the ability to make it any better.
But if you really want to get around it, you could just mod. If you finish that sentence, so help me God, I will sue you to death.
If they ended up doing to Pokemon Picross what they did to Rumble World, I think this would be a fantastic game. But as it stands, because of the way the game was designed, it's only pretty good. Pokemon Rumble Blast is everything that Pokemon Rumble World should have been. And this is neck and neck with the original for being the best Pokemon Rumble ever made. This improved and added upon the original game in so many ways. For the first time, your Pokemon can level up and get special abilities that make them stand out from other versions that you might have, which makes having multiple forms of the same Pokemon more useful. There's an overworld to explore, which is linear, but still nice to have. And from that overworld, you go into dungeons and fight waves of Pokemon. The combat is insanely simple, you just knock out whatever's in front of you, and if you're lucky, sometimes the Pokemon you defeat will be able to be collected and used in later battles. If you go into Pokemon Rumble expecting anything other than a simple beat-em-up game, you're gonna be disappointed. There is a story which, to be fair, is better than Detective Pikachu, which isn't the hardest bar to hit because so is a terminal diagnosis, but I don't think anybody is picking up Pokemon Rumble for the narrative. They're mostly looking to beat the snot out of every single creature that comes across their path. And if that's what you're looking for, then this game is close to perfect. Pokemon Battle Troze is proof that Pokemon Shuffle should not exist, because not only did this game come out first, it was also better in every single metric. This was a $6 eShop only title that was so much fun. Like its predecessor on the DS, you shift Pokemon around in order to get 3 in a row so you can clear them off the board. But you're not just doing this for no reason, you're doing it to defeat the Pokemon that you'll see on the top screen. There will be a couple Pokemon you need to defeat in order to move on, and your goal is to make as many matches as possible as quickly as you can to raise your combo to deal more damage. It was a cheap, one-time purchase puzzle game that I have put a disgusting amount of hours into across my various 3DS. Unlike the garbage that is Pokemon Shuffle, this doesn't limit your moves or your playtime. It is fast-paced and requires quick thinking to make the most of every second. And though it's relatively simple, it is so much fun. And it's a shame that this seems like it's going to be the last Pokemon puzzle game that's not trying to put you into generational debt.
The bank just called? Did you spend $12,000 on Pokemon Cafe Remix? No, of course not. Oh, thank God. It was $13,000. I want a divorce.
After how disappointed I was with Gates to Infinity, I had little to no expectation that Super Mystery Dungeon would be very good. But in all honesty, after replaying it, it is a very good Mystery Dungeon game. Most, if not all of the problems I had with Gates to Infinity were fixed with this title. And though it did a bit of overcorrecting, changing a lot of things that I loved about the early titles and replacing it with new mechanics altogether, I still think this is one of the best Pokemon spin-offs of all time. The biggest and most impactful change happens right in the beginning because they brought back the Pokemon personality quiz.
Thank God. How else am I supposed to learn about myself? Astrology? What's your star sign? Cancer. Stage 4.
But luckily for the psychopaths out there who want to pick their own Pokemon, you can still do that. And this time they learned from their mistakes and actually had a solid variety in Pokemon. The biggest disappointment with this game is that the story was really hit or miss. The main plot revolves around Pokemon being turned into stone. And of course, since you've been a Pokemon for a grand total of 3 days, you are the most qualified person to deal with this issue. Together with your partner, you travel to various locations in the Pokemon world, talking to legendary Pokemon and uncovering why this mess is unfolding in the first place. But the thing that really had me hooked here was that the gameplay was really good. In my first playthrough of this, I really didn't enjoy how item focused this game was, and I felt like it took away from the core gameplay experience being about the Pokemon. But with the inclusion of the new item types like wands and looplets, making it so every time you play the game it's a little bit different, and I'm starting to think that this has the best gameplay in the entire franchise. Because after playing it again, I love how the moment-to-moment gameplay feels so different. And though this seems like it's the last new Pokemon Mystery Dungeon story that we're ever going to get, this did a fantastic job tying together the world and making everything feel interconnected. But hopefully I'm wrong, and someday we get a new Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. And now we are left with the 4 main series Pokemon games.
What about the Virtual Console and Pokédex 3D? They didn't originally come out on the 3DS, and that's not even really a game.
But of these 4, up first is Pokemon Sun and Moon. And before you rush to cut my brake lines and push me into oncoming traffic, I just want to clarify that I don't think this game is bad at all. But of the main series Pokemon games on the 3DS, this one has the most issues. They take place in Alola, which is a great region, and everything from the charm and culture of the islands to the regional selection of Pokemon is very good. The real problem comes from the story and gameplay. You play as a trainer who moves to Alola from the Kanto region. A great premise that allowed them to tell you every single detail of everything that has ever happened on this island. You start the game and they start throwing information at you left and right. And truthfully, the story itself is really good. It's just that getting through it is like eating a frozen stick of butter. Especially in the early game, you're forced to sit through so many long, unskippable cutscenes that make it hard to really enjoy. And during my first and second playthrough, I really didn't mind, but every time I go back to replay it, it is such a drag to get through the first few hours that I end up normally dropping it. And it's a shame because out of both versions of Alola, this has the better story. Everything from the dynamic between Lucamine and her kids, to the way that Team Skull and the Aether Foundation work together to make Alola a horrible place to live, were done so much better in this version. And though this is still pretty good gameplay-wise, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon did a much better job smoothing out all of the edges that were in this title. And though ever since they released, the Alola games have gotten a lot of hate, I still think they are a fantastic region. But I don't think Sun and Moon are the best way to play them.
Sun, what are you playing? Pokemon Sun? Absolutely not. This is an Ultra Sun family.
Pokemon X and Y brought the franchise so many firsts. It was the first mainline game to be in 3D, the first game to have fairy types, and the first game to not get a deluxe version that it desperately needed. I still really like X and Y, even though it falls flat in a few areas. Mainly in the story that was set up to be so good and then just not executed well. The Kalos region was really well designed, and the concept of a Pokemon war was so cool. And I kept waiting for the story to get better and for the climax to make sense, and then it never did. Lysander had the potential to be a really interesting villain, but they never flushed out his goals enough for him to make any sense at all. He's just evil for the sake of being evil, and while that can be written well, it's not here. I knew from the moment I saw him he either fell in a vat of Cheeto dust or was going to be a villain. But outside of that, there is a lot to like here. This introduced Mega Evolution for the first time, which quickly became the most popular gimmick in all of Pokemon. So much so, they brought it back for Legend ZA along with a bunch of new Mega Evolutions. This was also the first time you could customize your character's outfit in a main series Pokemon game. And you even got a ride on a Rhydon, making the Pokemon finally live up to its name.
Boo! Bad joke.
All in all, X and Y are really good games. And if they were just given more development time or a deluxe version, they would be fantastic. But even as they are still very good and worth checking out. When Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon released, I think everybody around the world let out a collective,
"Again? Really?"
Usually between a regular and a deluxe version, there's about a 2-year wait. But in the Pokemon Company's infinite wisdom, they decided to release this a year after the originals. And unlike Pokemon Black and White 2, this wasn't a sequel, this was just an enhanced version. So if you were to go out and play this after Sun and Moon, you would be replaying a lot of the same story. And the story you did play was worse than the original. But the one thing that Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon did right was make the gameplay so much better. There were more trainers that were more difficult, a much better variety of Pokemon, and even surfing on a Mantine for some reason. Like I said, the main critique here though is that the story is not as good, which is not to say it's bad because there are parts about it I do like, especially the battle with Necrozma, but all of the characters' relationships feel slightly worse. But the thing I like about the Alola games is that this gives you more freedom to replay. If you want to play through the Alola region for the first time, you should start with Sun and Moon, just to get to experience the best version of the story, but if you want to replay the games after already playing, then Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon are a much better experience, giving you a similar story with all of the fun Pokemon action that you've come to know and love.
So why didn't they make Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon for the Switch instead of the 3DS? I don't know, what do I look like, the Pope?
But the best Pokemon games to release on the 3DS were Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Now, as much as I love Hoenn, I don't think there's a good reason to go back and play it on the Game Boy Advance unless you're playing Emerald. Because not only are Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire great games, they also improved a lot about what made Hoenn so great in the first place. The story remained pretty much the same. You move to a new house, meet your neighbors, and save your professor from being attacked by a wild Pokemon. But what makes this so good is that the gameplay is some of the best in the entire franchise. Hoenn already was a great region, but to add in things like the physical and special split and Wi-Fi connectivity made this even better. And then they took it one step further and brought over Mega Evolution from X and Y to make the gameplay stand out from the originals more than any remake in the series history. A lot of people dislike Mega Evolution, especially in this game, because it makes it very easy to sweep through everything in your path. But what's nice is that you don't have to use it. And though this is the textbook reason of why Pokemon needs a difficulty selection, I've never thought the game was easy to the point that it was no longer fun, especially if you just don't use Megas. As someone who grew up pouring hours into Ruby and Sapphire, exploring this region again was so nice. And the changes they added, like turning all of New Mauville into a shopping center, are a little strange, but ultimately work pretty well. And I could go on for hours about why Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are some of the best games in the entire franchise. But if I had to summarize it all into one sentence, it would be: if you are a Pokemon fan, please play this game.